titled Crowd FUD at a Near Breaking Point, and that's no exaggeration. This is the past 6 months of the ratios of Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and Solana's positive versus negative commentary across social media.
Hey everybody, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I have Brian from Santiment with me. And as you all know, we're going to do a deep dive into the data and metrics around Bitcoin and the altcoins and what's happening in this crypto market. Obviously, at the time of recording here, we're seeing a big sell-off, Bitcoin back below 90,000. Brian, I don't want to say happy Tuesday when we're recording this, but how are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different time for sure. We're all much more excited and enthusiastic when markets are going up, like they have been for most of the past year and a half, if we really think about it. But 2025, especially since the Trump inauguration, has been pretty disappointing. We had an all-time high on January 19th, and here we are about 5-ish weeks later, and we're down a little over 20% from that all-time high as far as Bitcoin's concerned. And as we'll discuss, Bitcoin is actually holding up somewhat well compared to the massive bleeding going on with altcoins.
Yeah, and it's cyclical, and this is my third bull market, and I've seen this show before, but yet I understand the human element. People, they get scared and they get fearful, but overall, based on data, there isn't any invalidation here. Obviously, if the price keeps going down and down and down, yes, there will be some sort of invalidation, but this just looks like a healthy, normal correction, flushing out leverage, and we'll find a bottom soon. And I know sentiment is a bit in the dumps.
Exactly. Yeah, I think this was bound to happen. We were going to see an eventual retrace. Some people are thinking this is just the beginning. I'm not so sure about whatever massive collapse some people are envisioning. But yeah, when you see like the average trading returns over, a 1-year period up above 50%, when the sector is a zero-sum game, that's a pretty good signal that we're going to have some sort of, what goes up must come down kind of scenario. And I think from what I'm seeing, there's enough pain and capitulation and massively bearish sentiment revolving around social media that it's justifying that we may already be starting to see signs that we're close to a bottom, because people are expecting such a larger collapse and selling off on this slide that it's giving some pretty prime opportunities for whales and sharks to be able to scoop up. And we can dig into the data a little bit now and look into how much of that they're doing so far.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take a look at the data, maybe the sentiment. What are people saying? From my small sample size, I'm seeing bull market's over. That's it. This is the worst bull market ever.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny how people define bull market. I think we talked about it before, but some people think you must be on like a 50% plus rally in just a few months in order to be in a bull market. And other people look at a bull market as like a multi-year thing. So if you looked at like the last 3 years, Bitcoin sure looks like it's still in a bull market because of how far up it's come. But some people are very much, like, what have you done for me lately? And if even 1 or 2 months go by without some all-time high somewhere, they freak out and think we're about to implode as an entire sector. Anyways, as I was saying, I think the doom and gloom is a bit overstated right now. It doesn't mean we're not going to be falling further, and we'll definitely get some tangible data here to look at and see how much evidence there is in either direction. But as we can see on just the past 24 hours, huge social volume uptick in Bitcoin. First of all, that makes sense because all eyes are going to be on crypto's top asset as markets are flushing. And then down here, you can see the vast amount of bleeding throughout crypto. Bitcoin itself is down 7.3% in just the past 24 hours. That's a big number, even for crypto, especially Bitcoin. Ethereum down a little over 9%. You can see some of the biggest pain altcoins would be Hedera down 14%, BitTensor down a little over 17%, Aave down 13%. A few are actually still up over the past 24 hours, like Ugold, Ryo, and Celestia. But for the most part, it's been a bloodbath here, and the mood, as you would expect, is quite pessimistic. Before I get to this price dominance chart, actually, I'd love to show the post we just put out titled "Crowd FUD at a Near Breaking Point," and that's no exaggeration. This is the past 6 months of the ratios of Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and Solana's positive versus negative commentary across social media. So that includes X, Reddit, Telegram, 4chan, Farcaster, and even Bitcoin Talk. So we combine all the discussions going on these 6 platforms, and our algorithm measures whether each comment is considered, very bullish, more on the neutral end, or bearish. So we're taking all of the bullish versus bearish posts, and when things are very bullish, you got a lot of bars that look like this. Bitcoin's red, Ethereum's yellow, XRP's blue, Solana's purple. So you can see they're all way up here as the, election is drawing near in September and October. And for the most part, it worked out because the bounce that happened in September was bringing a lot of optimism, and it really continued because the presidential candidate that most of crypto wanted ended up getting elected. And then we see the election response right here. Crypto goes nuts, hits a new all-time high of 108. And eventually we start to retrace and kind of be in this ranging period. And right around here, it started to get more on the low neutral end. You can see these lines, by the way. So anything above here is super bullish. The crowd is like euphoric. Anything below here, the crowd is super worried and pessimistic and bearish. And here, to make a long story short, is where we are now. All 4 of them are seeing essentially the most negative ratio of commentary across social media that we've seen, not just in the past 6 months like we're showing here, but pretty much since 2023. And that's pretty telling of where we stand now. And for those who've watched some of these videos with Tony and I before, we've stated quite clearly, markets move the opposite direction of the crowd's expectations. So even if it's not a perfect science, what we can say is extreme levels like here are usually, not always, but usually followed by a bounce, which kind of makes the overly panicked people pay and regret their decisions.
Yeah, and this is so fascinating. We talked about in last episode of human psychology and data format and watching it play out. It is so interesting. And to your point, I was looking at the Bitcoin RSI this morning, and it's in the oversold zone. And then you look at the sentiment, it is at the low, right, compared to the peak based on this chart you're sharing here. So I think we could certainly see a bounce coming soon. Doesn't mean we're going to rally to $120,000 immediately, but we start slowly crawling out of this hole.
Yeah, good point. I was just bringing up the RSI because I hadn't looked at it in a while, and you're right. It's way down here at about 30, where 50 is average. We also have a template that can show a lot of different coins all on the same chart, top cap RSI comparison. So I know this looks super noisy, but long story short, like here's the average line at 50. Everything's below it, and some are really, really low, like Dogecoin I see here is down below 25. That's the brown line. So you're right. RSI is really showing potentially some opportunities. That's kind of the whole point of this. You want to be looking at RSI or sentiment as kind of a counter indicator, where the lower it is, the less risk there is to add on to your position or buy. And of course, there's a lot of external factors. What's going on with the Fed? Are they going to raise interest rates? Is Trump doing the right stuff he promised? All of these things that are factoring in, wars around the world and things like that, always can muddy the data. But if all else is equal, understand that this is essentially a probability indicator, where the lower you get, the higher probability we have of price is rising if you were to buy in right now. So not a bad sign right there.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I think many times people talk about, you know, DCA, buy the dips and so forth. But when you're actually going through the moments when the market's down, your human emotions, your brain is wired to protect you, right? To avoid any risk and things like that. But that's a time you have, it's the best. And like you said, higher probability of taking a position and having the potential to make returns. Obviously, you know, black swan events can happen and wipe out all our charts and data and so forth. But, you know, black swan events set aside, this is the time, but it's hard for many people unless they've really taken the time to go through the data and they form a thesis around that data, not just looking at it, but understanding the principles of investing and market analysis. It's hard for many people. And it took me years to get to this point, but I hope people who are watching and listening understand how this all works.
That's a really great point, Tony. And I remember back in late 2022 during the FTX collapse when crypto sentiment was probably the worst I had seen since I started learning about crypto. As Bitcoin was trickling down to 15K, 16K, I saw a lot of people saying, I feel like this is probably the right time to buy the dip. I just can't do it because all I've been seeing is bleeding and market caps dropping more and more every day. And I don't have the heart, even if prices rise, I'm just going to sit this one out because I don't trust crypto anymore because of what SBF did to the crypto sector. And, you know, obviously people regret not buying at 15K, 16K now. And it reminds us how relative all of these rallies are. Like a year ago, we'd be thrilled to see Bitcoin at 86, 87K like it is now. But compared to a month ago, people are, you know, pulling their hair out and, you know, walking themselves back onto the ledge however they can.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. But this is where, Brian, you know, I think the next data set of what whales are doing, it's so important because the smart money, they understand these principles. They understand the market cycles and they don't move by emotion versus how the retail and the herd does. So they often are doing the opposite. So what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. This is one of my favorite charts I like to keep tabs on. And for once, Tony, I mean, I feel like every week or 2 weeks we've done these, we've seen whales moving up and up and up. But for once, they're actually taking a tiny bit of profit. It isn't much in the grand scheme of things, but since February 19th, over the past 5 full days, since we have data up until February 24th, we'll get the 25th after the day closes today. But they've taken about 5,911 Bitcoin out of their wallets collectively and essentially sold it off to smaller wallets. And this is measuring, by the way, all wallets that hold at least 10 Bitcoin. And they have a very, very good correlation with where prices move next on a long-term basis. So they started this huge accumulation cycle back in mid-October, between October 12th and February 19th, they added collectively about 157,000 Bitcoin, just tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, if I'm doing the math right. But for once, they're actually taking a little bit of profit. I don't think this is much, but during flat times where they're not accumulating or down times, that's when we start to see prices move down. So this, at least partially, is contributed to just this 4-5 day negative behavior from sharks and whales who are taking a little bit out of their wallets for once.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the chart; it's not a significant dip or anything, but definitely a downward, a little bit of a, well, I don't know how you want to call it, but a small dip. I don't know.
A little divot in the road, yeah.
Yeah, and then so I guess, you know, over the next couple of weeks, we can look back at this and see if there's an uptick or continued decline here.
I'll be surprised if they don't accumulate this dip a little bit, especially with retail selling off their coins. They've got to be going somewhere, right? And like, even looking at this data tomorrow, I won't be surprised to see, oh, they've added back 2,000 of those Bitcoin from all of the retailers that are screaming that this is the end of crypto and trying to sell off their coins as quickly as possible.
Mm. Now there was the Bitcoin dominance chart. I think you
Yeah.
had. We could take a look at that and see in comparison with some of these top alts.
Yeah. So this chart is pretty cool. It's measuring the just overall price of Bitcoin divided by the top 5 altcoins out there that aren't stable coins: Ethereum, XRP, Solana, Doge, Cardano. It's, if we go all the way back to like pre-2021, it gets a little unfair because, assets like Solana and Doge weren't really what they are today. But if we just, start, we'll say exactly 3 years ago, and we just look right here. So this was the price dominance that Bitcoin had back in February 2022 compared to now, where it's almost tripled compared to then when we compare its price versus these other 5 assets. Long story short, altcoins during this retrace, especially beginning right after Trump's inauguration, right around here, that's when Bitcoin's price dominance just soared. Even though everything's dropping, the whole thing with Bitcoin is it's a relative safe haven compared to the other thousands, tens of thousands of coins that are available, because it just does not have nearly the volatility that these other coins do. So especially when you're in a bear market, but you're not sure how long the bear market's going to go, and you still want to have exposure to crypto, that's when you see a lot of people flocking to Bitcoin. And, Bitcoin's price may drop 20% in a given 2 months, but it's not nearly as bad as a 50% drop from Doge, or a 70% drop from a random meme coin that finally has been exposed as not a long-term source of value.
Yeah, for sure. And look, personally, I know I'm a bit biased. I hope some of these meme coins bleed out. A lot more liquidity goes back to Bitcoin. And this is kind of the cycle, right? Bitcoin leads the market. A lot of liquidity generally enters Bitcoin. Then the profits rotate to altcoins, and then rinse and repeat goes back to Bitcoin. So I'm hoping the bleeding of the altcoins, especially meme coins, and that liquidity starts flowing back to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy behavior for the markets to take whenever we go through these cycles. You'll see altcoins bleed and bleed and bleed, but the overall market cap doesn't drop that much in all of crypto, because it's just kind of being moved to Bitcoin until people are risk averse. And essentially, once the crowd is afraid to take risks, that's when whales and sharks can comfortably push markets the way they want and take the risks themselves. And then the cycle will swing back the other way, and people will start coming up with Luigi Inu and all of these meme coins that get like temporary hype again, and they want to gamble with their Bitcoin profits. So it's all very cyclical, and we just tout patience right now more than anything.
For sure. Let's take a look at stablecoin liquidity. Are we seeing any increases or decreases on the Tether front? And I guess, we could see if some of that stablecoin liquidity could be deployed to buy the dip.
Sure. So this is a chart that shows Bitcoin supply and exchanges, which has been dropping drastically over the last 3 years. Tether's top exchange addresses. So this is showing the amount of Tether being held on exchanges by the top 10 exchanges that hold Tether. And it's been skyrocketing, which is a very good sign. USD coin's actually been declining a little bit, but it doesn't make up for how much Tether has been going up. So I consider this a pretty good sign. If we want to get into further detail and just look at the overall amount of supply on exchanges, we can do this. We'll just reset the template by clicking reset layout. And then I'm going to say, show me the supply on exchanges as percent of total supply. And we'll even just include the overall amount of supply and exchanges also. So what this shows, don't care about the price of Tether because it's always going to be near $1. But the percent of all Tether that's on exchanges is up to about 55.8%. And there's about $43.67 billion worth of Tether currently sitting on exchanges. That's a pretty good sign when you look at where we're at now compared to the past 3 years. So plenty of liquidity in terms of Tether. If we switch to USDC, the second largest stablecoin, not quite the same story at all. The percent of USD coin on exchanges is actually way down at about 11.6%, after kind of being up around near 20% in November, 3 months ago. So that's quite a drop. There's still about $4.37 billion worth of liquidity in terms of USD coin on exchanges, which is not bad, actually. But again, I think Tether's the bigger story in a good way than USD coin is in a bad way.
Yeah, for sure. Tether, obviously the dominant stablecoin, largest in the market, and has that global presence versus USD coin or USDC, not so much. So that's interesting. The supply is going up. As far as I don't even know if it makes sense to look at individual altcoins. They're all bleeding out against Bitcoin right now. So
we can always look at just like the overall trending ones,
sure.
Perhaps that. If you had another idea in mind, we could do a couple quick altcoin analyses as well at the end of the call. But I did want to point out, Bitcoin by far is the top trending asset, and then we have some relatively obscure ones. Ella, which is one I don't really follow much at all. It's been getting a lot of discussions. In terms of a get rich quick and big pump coming asset. That's usually not a good sign if that's the crowd consensus about something. The only people that are really catching a huge pump like that are the ones doing it while it's under the radar and it's a niche coin. XRP obviously is a nice large top cap that's being talked about a lot. And people are actually quite skeptical, as we let off the call with. People are very bearish toward top caps in particular right now. We've got Vana, Alt, Litecoins up there. FTT, interestingly, is up there, the old native coin for FTX.
I think that's because someone took over Sam Bankman-Fried's Twitter or X account and started tweeting on it last night. So I think that's why that's trending.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's exactly what it's saying here in the summary. So that's fascinating. Kendu, I've seen for the last few days, which is interesting. It's not really doing anything special in terms of price, but it's been getting some increased attention in terms of like a viable meme coin once markets turn around. So I'm sure many of you know more about that than we do, but it's interesting to see. Polkadot's up there, and then Cow for whatever reason. So these are just the coins seeing the highest increase in discussions compared to their normal rates. So if you're interested in what projects might be driving markets at any given time, this is an awesome place to start. And Tony, maybe if you have a few other altcoins, we could look at their actual network health a little bit.
Yeah, let's do Solana, XRP, and ETH. Solana's been taking a beating. It's pretty rough out there, obviously overall for the entire altcoin market, but Solana is taking a beating, especially with all the meme coin controversy and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're down from its peak, a very short-lived peak on January 19th. They've been hammered down 51%. And that's only 5 weeks worth of price performance. So as you would imagine, as we already saw in that first chart I showed, it's an extreme bearish sentiment toward the number 6 market cap asset right now, which was number 4 at one point, like earlier in 2024, if I'm not mistaken, either 5 or 4. So they got flipped by Binance Coin and XR. I don't know if XRP was ever below it, but yeah, they're number 6 right now. I'm looking at their funding rate. There's been some signs that people are really trying to short it, which would be a great sign. We want to see a lot of shorters that are trying to jump in and capitalize on this great decline here, or not so great decline. And if they do, then those shorts could be liquidated at any time and actually function as rocket fuel to push prices back up. Just like extreme longs that we saw back here in December were liquidated and accelerated the downturn that we saw. So funding rate would be a good one to keep an eye on for Solana. If we see just the overall rate of discussion, I believe there was an uptick. Yeah, especially on the 18th for whatever reason, right when they were really plummeting, got down below 170. So this big social dominance spike, I'll get rid of funding rate. Basically, whenever you see big spikes in discussion, that's an indication that there's a high probability of a price turnaround. So prices are going way up. Of course, everyone is euphoric about Solana here on January 19th when it gets above, what, 289-ish or so. And of course, all that FOMO leads to people buying at the top and then regretting it as we see this huge downturn. Then we get this pretty big spike here right at the bottom of the plummet. And because of the big FUD, there's a temporary, very short-lived, but temporary solace for Solana. And then it proceeded to go down, and there's not as much talk about Solana, but it's still being pretty highly discussed compared to normal. You can see the overall rate of discussions just trickled up and up and up over the past 6 months.
Yeah, and to your point of those shorts starting to build up, what we've often seen is when it goes to the extremes on the longs, obviously you got a big correction, but then on the short side, when you have the extreme, you get a short squeeze. So, with all these signals highlighting that here, the sentiment's down in the dumps, RSI is down, and the shorts start piling up, you get a short squeeze coming soon.
Exactly. That's what we'd be hoping for. You also mentioned Ethereum. So first of all, Ethereum had a massive spike in discussions just 3 days ago. And that, I think, was actually somewhat of a positive spike because it was doing a little bit better than most. It was seeing on this recovery something like a 10% boost or so, and people jumped on that and said, all right, it's finally Ethereum's time to jump in. And then boy, did they regret it, because Ethereum just plummeted right afterwards.
Yeah, I know ETH has been struggling a lot, but I think it will eventually catch up. And I think a catalyst that could really drive a lot of money into ETH is if the SEC approves like staking in the ETH ETF.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be huge for sure. So many people are waiting on that. And I think that could actually be why it's been underperforming, because the long-term traders are getting impatient with the lack of news from the SEC. But in the meantime, I mean, I'm also watching things like MVRV for Ethereum, which stands for mean value to realized value. In short, the further below 0% this line is, or this line is, the less risk you have in buying or adding onto your position. So considering both the short-term line and the long-term line are well into the negatives now, doesn't mean this is the exact bottom and now we're going way up, but buying here is doing so with a historically advantageous timeline at your disposal, because you're buying into others' pain. Mathematically, we have tangible evidence that people are down money on both a short and long-term basis, meaning that in a zero-sum game, you have an advantage by buying into an asset where much of the losses have already happened. So keep in mind, it's a probability indicator, not just a definitive buy here, sell here trigger. But that looks good in terms of Ethereum's short and long-term perspective, really.
Let's take a look at XRP and we'll wrap it up on that one.
Let's do it. So XRP, like most, it's just not seeing much on-chain activity. It's definitely down compared to the hype that was happening, especially in December. Yep, MVRV. So it doesn't look quite as amazing as Ethereum. The short-term traders are down a lot because XRP was on just a tear going into mid-January before it finally started to fall. But long term, traders are actually still up a ton because you can see where things were back in early November, like literally right before Trump came in, and how much it blasted off right after he came in, because the XRP in particular has been having quite a long saga with Gary Gensler and the SEC. And this was considered a huge triumph when Trump came in because they knew it meant Gensler was going out the door. So they pushed up prices a ton. And even after this retrace, average returns for any address that's been active in the past year is at about plus 39%. So still a little bit of risk if you're looking for a long-term play on XRP.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. Everything that's happening right now, and feels like a bit of a reset after the strong move up in Q4. Alt's bleeding out, Bitcoin correcting a bit, but liquidity flowing back to Bitcoin eventually, and Bitcoin stealing the show again, leading the market, and then liquidity cycles back to the altcoins. It's like the same thing repeating over and over.
Exactly. And just as a reminder, we're still on most coins that have existed for at least a couple of years, they're still up a ton compared to where they were just a year ago. And it's tough to not lose that perspective a little when you finally start to see some legitimate bearish price action. But overall, I still like the prospects of a turnaround, especially because the crowd has shifted its mood so extremely to a negative perception. That's usually a good sign that we're getting close to some bottoms and capitulation indicators.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Brian, good stuff, man. And hopefully when we meet in another 2 weeks or so, Bitcoin has found its bottom. It's starting to move up, and we can see how things are playing out then. But thank you so much for joining me.
Always, Tony. Pleasure.